Hi, I am Marina Barcelo, and I am the Student Inclusion Coordinator.
And I am Kate Hall, and I am the MSW Student Inclusion Intern.
Today, we will be talking about more accessible course materials. As you all know, the Office of the Student Inclusion Coordinator, Kate and me, have been focusing our efforts this year around access and inclusion. We've heard time and again from students, faculty, and staff that we need more support, resources, and information around accessibility. And so we are happy to be spearheading these conversations. This presentation is very much in line with our school's commitment to teaching excellence. Before we start, we'd like to first make a disclaimer. This presentation is not comprehensive. Because of time constraints, as well as our own lack of expertise, we don't have time to cover everything related to creating accessible course materials. The material we do focus on in this presentation is based on common experiences at the School of Social Work. I personally have met formally and informally with many faculty members who have requested more information about and support around accessible course materials. We know that there has been a lot of work at PSU recently around accessibility of online courses, but less so for in-person courses. So we hope this presentation will be helpful and informative.
Today we'll be talking about our goals for this presentation, what we mean when we refer to course materials, two approaches to course materials, universal design and UDL, proposal for new course material standards, barriers, resources at PSU, a culture of access, and resources for further learning.
Our short-term goal today is to provide you with the tools you need to make your course materials more accessible, and to explain why this is important. This presentation will not be focusing on the logistics and nitty-gritty of finding and creating accessible course materials. We are here to tell you about why it's important, what resources are available, and why the approach to accessibility we'll share falls in line with our school's values. We have created a Google Drive folder that contains the information and tools you need, as well as resources for further learning, and we'll be sharing that with you. This image is a screenshot of that folder, and the text reads, SSW Accessible Course Materials Drive.
Our long-term goal is to create a culture of access at the School of Social Work, and we'll talk more about this in a later slide. I am coming at this presentation as the MSW Student Inclusion Intern, a student here at the School of Social Work, and a student who's had a lot of experience navigating disability resource offices.
I am coming to this presentation as the Student Inclusion Coordinator, who supports both students and faculty around issues of equity, inclusion, and identity. I also come here as a new adjunct instructor with experience around providing DRC accommodations in the classroom, particularly around accessible course materials. I acknowledge that I am not an expert, but a learner committed to teaching excellence. It's important to clarify what we'll be talking about in this presentation, as well as what we won't be addressing. Course materials refers to materials used both inside and outside the classroom. In-class course materials include paper handouts, videos that are shown in class, and overheads, PowerPoint, or Google Slide presentations. Out-of-class materials include readings like articles, textbooks, and PDFs, and videos or podcasts assigned as homework. The things we won't be covering today include instruction and teaching style, participation and attendance policies, testing accommodations, and classroom configurations. This doesn't mean these aren't important things to talk about. It just means we literally don't have time to. If these are things you're interested in learning about more in the future, please let us know. There will also be some resources in the Google Drive folder that talk about these topics.
Examples of inaccessible course materials include video shown in class or assigned to watch at home without captions or a transcript. This makes it impossible for people who are hard of hearing or deaf to access a video, as well as anybody who struggles with audiovisual processing. Videos with auto-generated captions. Auto-generated captions seem like a great idea until you realize that a lot of the time they don't work. According to the ADA, accessible captions must have at least a 98% accuracy rate to even be effective, and research has shown that auto captions don't meet that standard. Auto-generated captions also operate on a white-centric algorithm. Anyone speaking with a non-American accent, when there are multiple speakers in the video, or the audio quality is poor, won't result in accurate auto captions. This reinforces ideas about whose voices are normal and standard. Readings that are poorly scanned. This causes issues for people using screen readers. Presentations with small text and poor color contrast. This makes it really hard for people with low vision to access the material. Only one format for classroom materials. For example, instructions only given verbally but not posted on D2L, or written on the board. This is related to a UDL, Universal Design for Learning principle, which we'll talk more about in a later slide. And finally, materials not posted online before class. This presents a barrier for people with executive dysfunction or learning disabilities, as well as anyone who may have trouble focusing in a classroom environment. Today, we are presenting and comparing two different potential approaches for course material accessibility. One reacts to diversity, and the other one plans for it. We're going to expand on each approach, take a deeper dive into the concept of the retrofit, and then compare both approaches using an example.
The first approach we'll be talking about today is what we're calling the accommodations or retrofit approach. To be clear, the barriers discussed here are not unique to PSU's Disability Resource Center. They exist all across the world in disability resource offices. We are just contextualizing them in this presentation to PSU's DRC for the sake of clarity. In this accommodations retrofit approach, instructors provide accessible course materials to students with accommodations from the DRC. Here is the general process. Students are responsible for registering with the DRC, acquiring medical documentation of their disability, filling out the necessary forms to submit to the DRC, and requesting specific accommodations based on that documentation. The DRC will agree on reasonable accommodations and notify the student's instructors of these accommodations. Depending on the accommodation, the instructor may need to send their course materials back to the DRC, so the DRC can create an accessible version of the materials, which then gets sent back to the student. The process of obtaining accommodations is extremely bureaucratic. The DRC operates under the principles of the ADA, including the ADA's definition of what a disability is and what reasonable accommodations are. We acknowledge that this is the way instructors are told to approach accessibility. While it may seem most familiar to you, we want to propose an additional or alternative approach when it comes to accessible course materials, after we explore the concept of the retrofit a little further.
The term retrofit is borrowed from the field of disability studies and refers to a process in which something that isn't accessible is retroactively made accessible for a temporary period of time, only when someone needs it. This slide features two images. The image on the left depicts a temporary wheelchair ramp placed over the outdoor stairs to a building's entrance, with an empty wheelchair sitting at the top of the ramp. The image on the right depicts a person sitting in a robotic wheelchair at the top of a flight of outdoor stairs. This wheelchair has been engineered to climb stairs without the use of a ramp. The retrofit refers to a type of accommodation that is only added after the fact, rather than incorporated from the get-go. It is implemented when an individual person needs accessibility and is temporary. For example, a wheelchair ramp that is added because a building only has stairs, like in the first photo. Another example is this wheelchair that is built to climb up and down stairs, like in the second photo. We're not going to be talking about these examples in depth, they're just here to illustrate the concept of the retrofit. But the real solution in both of these situations would be the existence of a permanent ramp. In the classroom, accommodations represent retrofits. For example, a captioning accommodation from the DRC, in which the DRC creates captions or transcripts for an uncaptioned video because a student in the class needs them. The takeaway here is the presence of retrofits or accommodations indicates inaccessibility, but instead of changing the actual structure, accommodations act as a temporary band-aid. In the classroom, retrofits are designed to temporarily make disability go away, not to empower disabled students, but rather to achieve in spite of their disability or around it. More importantly, they preserve stigma and do not allow for change. As long as retrofit solutions are available, the possibility of real accessibility takes a back seat. For clarification, retrofits are not wholly a bad thing. Wheelchair ramps and other structures in the built environment can be really helpful. But because of the unique nature of academic ableism, retrofits are much less effective in higher education.
This is a quote from the book Academic Ableism, Disability in Higher Education by J. Timothy Dolmage. This slide features a photo of the book cover which says, Academic Ableism in white and red capital letters. The quote reads, "Disability has become the whack-a-mole of higher education. When disability pops up, we slap it with a quick accommodation, and we just hope it doesn't pop up again. The nature of the retrofitted accommodation requires that we make no lasting changes to our pedagogy or to the culture of the university. Just whack it whenever it pops up." This book is available through open access online. It will be in our resources slide and Google Drive. Next, we're going to talk about the second approach to accessible course materials.
The universal inclusive approach. This approach involves instructors preemptively making sure their course materials are accessible using resources that exist at PSU. It involves making sure the videos shown in class have captions, that your PowerPoints have enough color contrast, and that the readings you are posting on D2L for homework are screen reader accessible. We'll talk more specifically about these standards soon. This approach anticipates, rather than reacts to, diversity. It anticipates that your students will not all have the same needs. It involves choosing your course materials based on whether or not they can be made accessible, rather than how well they fit into your pedagogy. And it involves implementing some principles of UDL, which we'll talk more about soon. It's important to note that even though this approach may seem totally unfamiliar, there are some instructors in the School of Social Work who already take this approach. To use the example from before, captioning on videos shown in class. With the universal inclusive approach, the instructor would only show videos in class that have captions. If they already have an uncaptioned video picked out in their curriculum, they would look for a captioned version of that video, or find a different captioned video that conveys the same information. Now, we're going to compare these two approaches using an example. Our example is, a student needs captioning on videos because they're hard of hearing. In the accommodations approach, it is the responsibility of the individual student to acquire captions through obtaining medical documentation, registering with the DRC, etc. But just because someone isn't registered with the DRC doesn't mean they don't have classroom accessibility needs. There are so many barriers to obtaining accommodations through the DRC: time and energy constraints, institutional bureaucracy, etc. If you are a first-generation student, a single parent, a person working full-time, or a person without a diagnosis, you might not be able to get your needs met using the accommodations process. But the accommodations approach sends the message that only individual students with medical documentation can have accessibility needs. And who has the easiest access to documentation? White, wealthy, visibly disabled people. This individualized process ultimately reinforces the belief that disabled students and disability as a whole are a burden to the university.
In a universal, inclusive approach, however, it is the responsibility of instructors, PSU as a whole, and society at large to provide accessible course materials, including captioned videos. This sends the message that many people, regardless of documentation, have accessibility needs. And there are actually systems in place to prevent people, especially non-white, non-wealthy, non-visibly disabled people, from acquiring medical documentation. But that these people's accessibility needs are real and worthy of being met. This ultimately reinforces the belief that the presence of disabled students and disability as a whole are actually valuable in the classroom. So why should you take a universal inclusive approach? First and foremost, it is a way to value disabled students through acknowledging the ableism in the accommodations process and working to repair that damage. It reduces barriers that some students face in accessing the DRC. It allows students who aren't able to register with the DRC to have their needs met. It contributes to the sustainability of your course, and it will meet some of the most common accommodation requests related to course materials for captioned media, overheads, and PowerPoints before class begins. So when you receive an accommodation email related to course materials for students in your class, you will already be set up to meet those most common needs. To be clear, we are not advocating for getting rid of the DRC. Students will still need access to the DRC for accommodations around testing, furniture, absences, medical procedures, lighting, etc. Instead, we are advocating for the responsibility for accessibility to be shared. The DRC provides services that instructors are not capable of meeting on their own. Text-to-speech software, ergonomic furniture, room changes, etc. Some accommodations, like for example enlarged text, will depend on a specific student's needs. So you will still need to work with the DRC on accommodation requests like these. They just won't be for the most common course material accommodations. We want to acknowledge that instructors are told again and again that they are only responsible for students with accommodations from the DRC. It even says this on the website, and this is where we want to encourage a new way of approaching accommodations.
We don't have a lot of time to go into detail today, but it feels important to mention universal design, as well as some critiques of universal design, since we're using the word universal in one of our approaches. These critiques are less about universal design itself and more about the way universal design is talked about, rhetoric about its purpose, who it's for, and why it's important. Some background. Universal design was a concept developed by Robert Mace, a disabled architect, in the 1970s. It strived to create spaces that were accessible to disabled people from the get-go, rather than with temporary retrofits. It initially foregrounded disability and disabled users, and it wasn't presented as a checklist of accessibility features, but as a process, a verb, a way of doing design. But after the passing of the ADA in the 1990s, universal design became separated from its original context and depoliticized. Rhetoric focusing not on disability accessibility but ease of use for everyone became the norm, and designers used this logic as the main driving force to implement universal design, rather than the idea that disability accessibility was important enough to implement on its own. For example, curb cuts, like the one shown in this image. They were initially designed for wheelchair users, but universal design rhetoric focuses more on the fact that they also benefit people pushing strollers and joggers. Universal design rhetoric also features a narrative of erasing disability rather than planning for it. Through this depoliticization, it has also become more of a checklist than a process, aka checklistification. There is, in reality, no such thing as 100% accessibility, and it's important to acknowledge that so we don't get trapped in checklist thinking. But also, just because there's no such thing as 100% accessibility doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to make things accessible to the maximum number of people possible while foregrounding disability. To learn more about critiques of universal design, especially from a social justice and feminist disability theory lens, I highly recommend checking out the work of Amy Hamrai. We've included links to their work in the Google Drive. Next, we're going to talk about UDL. UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning and is a framework that translates universal design onto a learning environment like a classroom. This slide features a drawing of 3 human brains with different areas highlighted in green, blue, and purple. The guidelines for UDL include multiple means of representation, how we deliver information, multiple means of engagement, how students can learn, and multiple means of action and expression, how students can show what they know. This focus on multiplicity and flexibility does a lot to increase accessibility. But the rhetoric around UDL has, like universal design, de-centered disability. For example, the predominant narrative is unlocking the potential of all learners, targeting different areas of the brain to maximize learning. There is a focus on non-disabled students' unique learning styles, rather than on disabled students' accessibility needs. Instructors are encouraged not to accommodate disabilities, but to accommodate different learning styles. These critiques don't mean that UDL isn't a valuable framework or that we can't or shouldn't use these principles. These narratives are just something to be aware of and to resist. Jay Dolmage, author of Academic Ableism, suggests to explicitly link teaching and learning strategies to disability experience when possible, and place students with disabilities in the middle of the design process. When we use UDL, we should foreground disability, like Robert Mace originally intended in universal design. Finally, UDL principles apply way beyond what we're talking about in this presentation. It talks about teaching styles, class activities, and more, and we'll share some of these resources in the Google Drive.
We are proposing these new standards for course materials in the School of Social Work. In class, all videos have captions, not auto captions. All podcasts have transcripts. All presentations use large text with high contrast colors. Post all materials online before class. Make sure handouts are available online. Instructions are given in multiple forms, verbally, on the board, in handouts, and online. Out of class, all readings are screen reader accessible. The subject librarian can help you with this. There are also resources in the Google Drive folder. Videos, podcasts have captions or transcripts, or there is an equitable alternative. This is a UDL principle. It's okay if you can't find a captioned version of a video. You can offer an alternative option. Multiple options for learning the material: readings, videos, podcasts.
This presentation would not be complete without an acknowledgement that creating more accessible course materials does require extra work. It takes extra planning, extra time management, and extra organization.
It reminds me of when BSW and CYFS adopted the Racial Equity Curriculum Statement, which committed us to uplifting non-dominant voices in the curriculum. We had to put in the work, the time, the effort to actually uphold this commitment. It meant faculty had to critically examine their syllabi, their assignments, their readings. This wasn't easy, but we did it because we made a commitment to racial equity and teaching excellence, and we knew the hard work was in line with our values.
Thankfully, there are some resources at PSU to help you create more accessible course materials. This slide features 3 images. The one on the left is a screenshot of PSU's webpage titled Identifying Accessible Media. It contains a still shot of a video clip depicting a person talking. The one on the top right is a screenshot of OAI's accessibility support page. And the image on the bottom right is a screenshot of a link to a color contrast checker tool. One huge resource at PSU is OAI, the Office of Academic Innovation. OAI will create captions for your videos, but only if you own the video and upload it to a platform called MediaSpace. Their accessibility support page also has links to resources to help you create accessible PowerPoint presentations, Word docs, PDFs, and more. The DRC is also a good resource. They'll only provide captioning services to students with captioning accommodations, but they have an entire webpage about identifying accessible media, including which video platforms to look for and how to search specifically for media that has captions. This could be really helpful if one of the videos you're showing in class doesn't have captions and you want to look for an alternative video to show instead. Finally, the library is a great PSU resource. The social work subject librarian is Anders Tobiasen, and he can help you locate screen reader accessible PDFs and readings.
We want to ask you all to dream with us for a second. What would a culture of access look like at the School of Social Work? Valuing disabled people. Instead of viewing disabled people as burdens, we should actively want them in our classes. They offer really crucial perspectives and knowledge, especially related to social justice. We should be actively seeking out disabled students. Accessibility as an ethical commitment. Strive to meet the needs of the maximum number of people possible. If social justice is one of our values, accessibility should be something we strive for. Abled advocacy. Abled community members actively advocating for accessibility, not just disabled people. Too often, disabled people are the only ones advocating for access, but it doesn't have to be like this. Our calls for access will be stronger and more persuasive when more of us are speaking up.
Inclusive design. Design classes and curricula with disabled students in mind and prioritize accessibility over a specific pedagogy. Continuous engagement with writing and work by disabled people in your curriculum. Disability as a political identity. Moving away from a pathology deficit medical model of disability and towards viewing disability as a political identity. Finally, embrace redundancy. We are taught that redundancy is a bad thing and should be avoided. But in UDL, redundancy is a value. The more ways you can present the same information, the better. If you feel like the same information is being conveyed too many times and in too many different ways, you're probably doing UDL correctly. Finally, resources for further learning, and the Google Drive we've been talking about. The Google Drive can be found on the School of Social Work Faculty and Student Web Centers under the Resources tab, and the resources listed on this slide will all be in the Google Drive as well.
Thank you so much, and please let us know if you have any questions or concerns.